Hello and welcome. This is Ari Lax, and this week we have some fresh Amonkhet standard decks. This is Emma Handy's deck from the Open. She finished 32nd with Jeskai control, and actually, after the event, I asked her if she had any changes, which presumably will have gone up in her article by now. But this is the updated list that she would play after playing the Open. Her initial list was slanted against mid-range decks that she had expected to show up and beat Mardu. And the shifts away from that have kind of hedged the deck towards beating Mardu a little more, beating some of the other decks that popped up. So let's kind of go through what's going on here. Because we have irrigated farmland in our deck, we can get away with playing 27 lands and basically hitting all of our land drops and having perfect port towns. Great job. Great cards. There's still a Prairie Stream in the deck. I'm not 100% sold on that, but we'll see how that goes with 7 basics. Still have Wandering Fumaroles, but you don't have a full playset anymore. Not quite as required and not quite as good as it used to be in the past. The Gideon decks are a little less likely than, back in the day. I think I played 4 at Grand Prix Denver because against Blue-White, you could reliably threaten Gideons with it. Can't do that against Mardu, or you basically just die every time. So spells, we've got Removal, Blue Answers, and Finishers, basically. So in terms of removal, we're heavy on Magma Spray. One of the traditional issues for these decks has been Scrap Heap Scrounger, so this KOs that. We have a Forsake the Worldly, which is kind of like a Magma Spray in that it exiles Scrap Heap, but it also KOs Aetherworks Marvel, and it also KOs Heart of Kiran. So it's got a little more flexibility in a lot of good ways. Worth noting, can also KO an opposing cast out if they try to cast out a Gearhulk, because that will end horribly for them. Still on Harness Lightning is just the best removal spell. Immolating Glare is the backup cheap removal spell. There's not really anything else that lines up with how efficient this is in terms of killing stuff, even though the timing's a little awkward at times. And then a couple cast out. This card is expensive, but it does take care of Gideon in spots where you otherwise would be unable to because you're out of position against it. Heavy Counter Magic. This was part of the mid-range hedge, but has turned into something good. Aetherworks Marvel did win the Classic and has been showing up a decent amount, so you're pretty heavily free-boarded against that matchup. You have Essence Scatter, which is better against like Archangel Avacyn opposing Torrential Gearhulks than Horribly Awry. And because you have Magma Spray, you don't need to lean on the Essence Scatters that much. The Void Shatter Disallow split is mostly there because you actually, Disallow can create situations against specific Planeswalkers, namely Liliana the Last Hope, where if you just, get Liliana when they're on the play, it's kind of hard for this existing list without a cast out to back out of it, and they'll just ultimate. But you have a punish for that by being able to disallow the ultimate. Censor is one of your outs for that. Censor is just kind of great. Only 3 because with multiples you are going to have to cycle them, which is not great and not terrible. So you're not absolutely opposed to drawing multiples. So if you were, it would be 2, but the 4th copy does mean you are going to be cycling them a fair amount, which can be a little mana intensive when your endgame is this heavy. So let's talk about the endgame here. There's 4 Torrential Gearhulk, 4 Glimmer Genius as expected, and then Pull from Tomorrow as kind of your additional copies of Gearhulk. This card really kind of turns the corner at X equals 4, so it's just additional 6 drops that end the game. Not a lot to it. You just draw a bunch of cards and then your opponent loses. One thing worth noting, there is no life gain in the main deck. The older versions used to have Blessed Alliance. So managing your life total out of disintegration range or something like that can be a little tricky. Just something to keep track of. So moving to the sideboard, you've kind of got your answers and your additional threats, which there are a lot of additional threats because one of the things these control decks like to do nowadays is kind of juke into a proactive plan or a more proactive plan. But in terms of answers, we have another Forsake, clean up nonsense again like Aetherworks Marvel, another Cast Out, another way to clean up that kind of nonsense in Planeswalkers. Magma Spray, the reason that you're going so hard on Magma Spray is specifically the black aggro decks where you not only have to exile Scrap Heap Scrounger, but Dread Wanderer. So you do want the maximum number of that effect in that matchup. A Fumigate, you don't really need multiples of this effect ever, honestly. Um, but the first one is pretty nice. Uh, Worth noting, we're pretty close to Descend upon this in full range, but it's not quite there in this deck. You know, we can easily get land instant, and it's like a little sketchy on enchantment. But in slightly different decks, it might be worth considering Descend. And then we've got some counter magic to kind of fight these low-end counter fights against Marvel decks that have counter magic. And then the finishers. So Sphinx of the Final Word is the breaker for mirror matches. Without, like, Fuel are not going to be playing a lot of Fumigate, so this card is pretty hard to answer, like almost untouchable. Linvala is just an absolute backbreaker against aggressive decks, really nothing better than it. Archangel Avacyn's kind of your catch-all. Emma said to be aggressively sideboarding this in just to KO people. Just, you know, flash, Sarah Angel mode, kill them. Good luck. Dragon Master Outcast is your kind of cheap mirror match breaker where you can just get underneath your opponent with an Outcast with counter magic backup, and then that kills them. Specifically, you can cast it on a turn, and it's not like when you normally cast a threat in the control matchup, you're putting your shields down in terms of them having counter magic, but you can legitimately cast this card and win a counter fight afterwards pretty easily. Couple Nahiris, both as it's kind of like this weird answer threat thing, really good against mid range where you can threaten to cast it and kill their thing if they don't extend into it. Like, if you ever just get into a position where it resolves and starts doing stuff, they just kind of fall apart. And then Emma had a Gideon of the Trials. I did not have one of those on my account, and I just want to play with Gideon allies in the card. This card is just so absurd. So I swapped in the more aggressive Gideon. I've had good experiences with this card in the past, and we'll be able to think about if Gideon of the Trials would potentially be better. But if we're going to be attacking with people with Archangel, I just want to go ham with some Gideon allies and a car. It's so easy against like nonsense decks. Just be like, okay, turn 4 Gideon, go, and they're just I beat like again back to citing the same event of Denver. I beat Blue Red Ulamog Ramp. I just cast this card. They just couldn't beat it. They're just like, huh? Well, I guess I'll cast Hedron Archive. I'm like, attack for 5, counter your next spell. They're like, well, that is my entire life total. Oh, sorry, attack for 7. Yeah, the extra 3 power on resolution because you make the night token relative to of the trials is pretty absurd. Anyways, this is a deck that I think that it probably had a solid 4C matchup, but the way the metagame is shifting, I think that this deck definitely gets better than it was pre-banning. I think that the way your spells exist, you had X spells that beat 4C and X spells that beat Mardu, and your answers weren't the greatest split between the two. There's no good overlap. But the newer answers like cast out overlap between like Mardu and the stuff that people are playing now. And then the range of stuff that people are playing now is a lot more like stuff that is bad against the card Void Shatter. So your just average answer has gotten a lot better. So you can slant your deck a little towards Mardu, beating Mardu, and then kind of wrap up the rest instead of having these two huge enemies that you have to fight on both sides that are a little tricky to maneuver through.